from the rest of the group very, very quickly. The Fallujah marketplace was crowded, it was jammed, and our leaflets were so popular. And suddenly I realized I'm surrounded by a crowd of people. I don't speak their language. The crowd is not very happy. And one man just squared off with me face to face, and he said, "You Americans, you Europeans, you come to my home, I show you water you not give even your animals to drink, and this is all what we have. And now you say you will bomb our city again. You cannot kill my son. My son, he was already killed in a hard bush." And then it was as though another spirit came over him. He looked at me and the crowd and he said, "No, madame, you are too tired. You come with me, I get you lunch." Takes me by the elbow, steers me to a little tea shop, sends people out to try to find my friends, and really argues with us, why don't we go back to his home and have a meal with him? And so I think about Fallujah in 1996, and then I think about the storms of white phosphorus, the storms of bombings, the destruction of the beautiful mosques in Fallujah, all of the wreckage that's been rained down upon Iraq. And you know, there are conservative estimates that say the war in Iraq cost about $3 trillion. If you add the war in Iraq and Afghanistan together, Linda Bilmes, a Harvard scholar, and Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel economist, are suggesting maybe the cost is something like $7 trillion. But let's just stay with that $3 trillion. That would be a price tag that would cover all of the investments in renewable energies throughout the world from now until the year 2030, according to the number crunchers. And what have we spent it on? What have we created? I was in Jordan, and some young Palestinians came to me late at night and said, "Please, you must talk with us. We have to beg you to go to the Buqa prison in Iraq." And I thought, well, however in the world am I going to get into a prison that the Americans are running in the south of Iraq? I don't have any standing with the International Red Cross or the United Nations, but who could turn away from these youngsters? And they have themselves been imprisoned in that place. They were kids from Palestine. Saddam used to say to the youngsters from other countries, come and study in Iraq. We will train you. We will send you back to be doctors in your country. So they're once in third-year medical school. The other had almost finished his engineering degree. Their parents were saying, "Get home, come home now." But they were living in Baghdad and they didn't want to leave their studies. They didn't want to give it all up. What would happen if they left? They might never get back in again. So they took their chances and they remained living in their dormitory, which happened to be the tallest building on Haifa Street. The United States Marines come in to invade and occupy Baghdad, and of course they want to take over the tallest building on Haifa Street so they can see what's going on below, and they're whipping through the building, checking IDs, and they find out these youngsters are third country nationals, TCNs. There's not another question asked. They're arrested and they're thrown into a horrible, horrible prison in the south of Iraq. They were released, they think, because they spoke some English. And so they came because they heard an American was going to be going into Iraq, and could I get down to that camp and find out how their friends are? The families are frantic. Nobody's heard from these friends. Couldn't I please go and visit them? And somehow, much to my amazement, Major Garrity, an accountant from Nashville, Tennessee, is in charge of the Buqa prison. And the one asset I do bring to peacemaking is an extraordinary ability to look helpless. And so she let me in. She let us in. Jerry Zawada, Franciscan priest, and myself, and an activist from Northampton. We go bumping over the desert sand, spitting flies out of our mouths. It's one of the worst places I ever saw in my life. The sand was black and oily and greasy. This is a place that's been uninhabited. It's just kind of the spillover from various oil refineries. And that's where the United States built a tent prison. They didn't even have buildings. They just put these tents up and threw their prisoners inside the tents, and they'd bring them out for interrogation, and it would take months and months and months before they'd ever get before some kind of a military tribunal to find out what they were even charged with. And so we were able to meet these young men who were stuck there. And their story corroborated with the stories that had been told by the ones who asked me to go there, that they had been forced to march naked in front of United States military women. And this was for them a terrible humiliation as Muslim young men. That they were so scared during the colder months because they would dig themselves holes in the ground. They weren't even given adequate blankets, and they were trying to stay warm. But what if desert scorpions or desert snakes were to bite them? And that sometimes when they were really, really hungry, the guards would say to them that they had to bark like dogs in order to get their bowls filled. Or say in English, "I love George Bush." And the place is named the Buka Camp because it's named after a firefighter who was killed on September 11th. And so somehow the justification for this place is tied into the United States being under attack. And one of the boys started to weep, and he said, "I've never wanted to attack the United States." Well, the reason I wanted to tell you all about the Buka compound is because the self-styled caliph of the Islamic State, from what I've been told, is a man who took the name Ali Baghdadi. And he was captured a year after I was in that Buka compound, and he was imprisoned there for 5 years. And it was while he was imprisoned there that he did the outreach which helped him recruit some of the people that founded the extremist, fundamentalist Islamic State movement that is now occasioning the possibility of the United States sending more weapons and possibly more boots on the ground and more aerial bombardments and more drone surveillance. Do we think we won't create a new grouping that might be even more fierce and more frightening than the Islamic State? War after war after war after war. In Afghanistan, once upon a time, it was a land where the orchards produced apricots and mulberries and pistachios that could sustain an economy that also had shepherds crisscrossing the land, and there were irrigation systems, and the flocks could be replenished. This was an agricultural economy, and that's what it should be now. But it also happens to be geopolitically a place where the United States, I think because we are sensing a terrible competition with China and with Russia, the United States geopolitically wants to maintain a military basing within Afghanistan. And I think the United States also is aware that there could be some very, very precious rare earth minerals under the Hindu Kush Mountains, that it's also a potential transit area for energies, fossil fuels, and natural gas. Well, China's way ahead of us right now in terms of developing the means to extract those energies, because China hasn't been trying to maintain 1,000 bases all around the world. But for people in Afghanistan, how insidious it's been that somehow a very obescent mainstream media has cooperated with think tanks and public relations specialists to convince people across the United States that our troops made things better for women and children in Afghanistan, that we protected people in Afghanistan from the Taliban, that we made it possible for girls to go to school in Afghanistan. Well, right now, 23.4% of the girls over age 15 in Afghanistan are literate. That's not a very impressive record for 13 years of occupation on the part of the United States. And right now, the Taliban and other armed militant groups control 70% of the country. And when I stayed there with the young Afghan peace volunteers, one of the most touching moments I ever experienced was our young friend Gulamai being the one who volunteered to take the trash to the trash dump. It's kind of an embarrassing job because you've got a wheelbarrow full of trash, and what if it turns over? But as he was on his way to the trash dump, 4 young trash collectors, who, Burmai's Hazara, these trash collectors were 4 young Pashto boys, they said, please, before you go all the way out to the dump, could we go through your trash quickly and see what we might salvage? And Gulumai said, yeah, that's fine. And so these little experts went through our trash, and they pulled out pieces of bread and pieces of paper that they could salvage for fuel. And they thanked Gulumai. And then they pointed at one of the places we call poppy palaces, or narcotecture, these big ostentatious buildings that have been created by drug lords and people who profited from the war. And they said, look at how those people live, and look how we live. And I can't help but think about how, as the United States is vacating hundreds of ranges where they had dropped all kinds of unexploded ordnance in Afghanistan, an area that's twice the size of the entire New York City area, they're leaving behind munitions that are toxic, unexploded ordnance. And the United States said, well, nobody thought to kind of budget the $250 million that would be required to clean this up. But over the next 5 years, we'll really try to clean up after ourselves. And I thought to myself, well, what's the price tag on the naval carrier that's just being commissioned? $13 billion for a naval carrier that will, again, provoke and push with this Asia pivot, this turn toward challenging China, challenging Russia, and having this big, huge naval carrier. What's the price tag on what's called the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, which the United States has revealed just in time to say to the Iranians, if you don't sign a deal that we find acceptable, then this is what we might be able to order as a bunker buster. And I must tell you, I'm not very well rehabilitated. I did go to Whiteman Air Force Base to protest drone warfare, and now I really think I should go right back there to protest the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, which is being loaded onto planes at that same base. And when the judge had moved right into sentencing at my trial, the very earnest young military lawyer said, Your Honor, Miss Kelly is in great need of rehabilitation. But when I got out of prison, I went 4 days later to Beale Air Force Base and crossed the line again, so I'm not being very rehabilitated, I don't think. But we really have to challenge the United States military on what kinds of new weapons, new designs of weapons are being developed, because we have to think about the word proliferation. At the end of World War II, only one country had the atomic weapon. And look at us now. So right now, we've got the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, this bunker buster. It weighs 15,000 tons. It carries 5,360 pounds of explosives, and it can burrow under the ground 200 feet, and then when it's detonated, it could blow out enough of a hole that a second Massive Ordnance Penetrator could come in and destroy the Iranian nuclear weapon facility in a place called Ferda. But if we do that, do we think that Iran's not going to have any allies that might respond, and that we're not going to be ratcheting up the possibility of growing closer and closer to a nuclear exchange? It's almost as though the train is ready to go over the abyss, and we're in the observation deck of the first-class car saying, oh, we like the view. So we have to speak up. We have to speak out. We have to find our voice collectively and together. But as I know so many of you have said around your dinner tables and your prayer tables, sometimes you start to feel overwhelmed. So I'm so pleased to be able to bring 2 accounts to you that have helped me get wind back in my sails. The first comes from South Korea. And off the coast of South Korea, there is a place where the Samsung company, the Hyundai company, the South Korean government have decided we are going to create a big, huge berth that can accommodate American ships that might be carrying nuclear weapons. And the South Korean government has said to the people who lived along that coastline, well, yes, we know that you've been so proud of